Hello and welcome back to CBR MTG. My name is Angus Mackay and I'm joined here by Philip Nicholson.
Hello.
And today we are watching Robert Lark on Kess Pile and Nicholas Chmielewski on Rug Life. This is round 2 of our Eternal Masters Highlander event. You can check out the playlist if you want to find more. We recently did round 1. Which was Blue Moon versus Storm, which was a very good match. So we're joined here again for round 2, watching these two heavily blue decks play against each other. Phil, why don't you give us a rundown of these two decks and tell the audience how it ticks?
Yeah, so both of these decks are pretty popular in the 7-point Highlander format at the moment. They've been seeing a lot of play for quite some time, putting up a lot of really good results. The Grixis control deck, or Caspile as it's sometimes called, is just a control deck in those 3 colors, looking to leverage all of the powerful effects that they have access to. So you get all the good counterspells out of blue, you get the removal, hand disruption out of black, as well as the excellent delve threats from the Tarkir block, and then red just kind of fills out a couple of holes with a few pieces of burn here and there, and a couple of neat sideboard cards. Whereas the Rug deck is a tempo deck, looking to run out an early threat like a Delver or a Tarmogoyf, Young Pyromancer, something like that, and then use counterspells like Daze or Mental Misstep that don't cost you any mana or cost you very little, and then close out the game with some burn, maybe a Price of Progress.
Yeah. The Rug Life recently sort of hit the scenes, at least in the last year, thanks to Sav McClinton of Adelaide Eternal, bastion of the format. But it did end up taking the first place, I believe, with Justin Cheong on CanCon 2019. So it's definitely shown itself as a top-tier archetype in the last year. It's definitely shown its power, but unfortunately, it looks like Nick is mulling right down to 5, which is not going to be good against this tempo deck, so hopefully he can sort of weed his way out of it.
Well, he's yeah, it's never good to be mulling to 5, but he is the control deck, so he does have the big swingy piece of card advantage in his deck.
Mm-hmm.
So he does have a Mystic Confluence, he has the Cass, has those big, powerful blue planeswalkers like Jace the Mind Sculptor. So if there is a deck that can come back from a Savage Mulligan, it is usually control, or
absolutely.
a really unfair combo hand. But it's definitely always rough mulliganing down to 5.
Yeah, for sure. It looks like Robert on Rug Life is fetching out his land tapped turn 1. He had the opportunity to ponder turn 1, but I think he was more inclined to hold up the Spell Pierce, possibly even just sniping that first cantrip, because, you know, that's a good way to stop your opponent from digging out of their own mulligan.
I think the only other land he has is also a fetch land, so he might just be thinking that if he ponders and he likes the cards, he only gets one of them, doesn't have the opportunity to keep all of them there, because he'll be forced to shuffle one away on his next turn.
Yeah. That's a great point, and it looks like I think both of them have a pretty well. I mean, Robert definitely has a reactive hand, which is pretty surprising, and he does have Vendilion Click in hand, which might sort of swing the tide at the end of Nick's turn. But Nick's hand's surprisingly full of threats. So Jace, Vendilion Click, I think Tassiger at the back as well as Snapcaster Mage. So I don't think he's planning on doing anything, and I think I would have probably run out that click, but I think now that he has Spell Pierce in hand, he's probably just going to wait. Never mind, by the looks of it, he's just playing out that ponder.
Yeah, I mean, he might just think that playing the Vendilion Click into 3 open mana, where it's very likely to be counterspelled or removed and not really gain that much value beyond looking at Nick's hand, it's just not really worth it. Yeah. And if you're going to ponder into those 3 cards, you should probably just cast Ponder.
Yeah, I mean, if you knew you were going to ponder into 7 points of cards with the Ancestral Recall and the Time Walk, we definitely see it was Time Walk.
I mean, yeah, I just meant he was going to hit his 5th land drop.
Oh, right, of course. Yeah, so with Robert, it's interesting to see how having a camera in front of you kind of changes things. Hopefully he's not giving away too much information to his opponent by flashing that pretty fantastic ponder to the camera. But we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, and I believe, as you said, he does have a spell pierce, so he could definitely Ancestral himself here and protect it. But he's also got... This is actually a pretty interesting situation, because obviously he fires off the Ancestral. Not only is he going to have to discard the cleanup, but it's also going to show Nick the Time Walk, because he knows he'll draw into it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's probably, unfortunately, best to just kill the Cleek in response to the trigger and let Cleek take the Ancestral, which feels pretty bad.
Yeah, but you got to do what you got to do. At least you'll draw into that Time Walk, which I believe is directly on top of his library.
It should be. If it's not, he'd draw it for turn, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just unfortunate because if you snap off the Ancestral there, you still have to discard to clean up.
Yeah.
So you don't even really get the value of actually using it.
Which is pretty funny because he kind of has the perfect answers for everything but Click with that Is It Charm and Spell Pierce. He was kind of ready for anything, but Vendilion Click doesn't care about those two cards.
Yeah, I mean, seems pretty clear his intention was to probably run out an Ancestral and back it up with Spell Pierce.
Yeah.
But have access to those other options if he did need them. It just was unfortunate for him, the fact that the threat Nick had also interacted with his hand.
Yeah. Any reason why you think that he wouldn't probably punch off the fire instead, try and get a little bit more value? He was pretty clearly hoping to hold up 2 mana instead of 1. Maybe he was thinking about the Is It Charm?
Yeah, maybe, but he does also have the Spell Pierce available, so I'm not sure. It might also be that Fire does have access to that Ice mode, which you could potentially want. If you're familiar with the matchup and you kind of you know what to expect out of the Grixis deck, you might be thinking that Ice could have value in tapping down something like a Tasigur or a Gurmag Angler to let you punch an attack through.
Yeah, very good tempo play.
Goblin Guide doesn't attack very well into those cards.
That is very true. And we're seeing the getting a little bit more value off that Time Walk, which was previously just an Explore, but now he's sort of running out that Vendilion Click.
Yeah, now it's a save at the moment, so that's much better.
That's true. So Vendilion Click being able to look at his opponent's hand, and it looks like Nick's just let it resolve with Dig Through Time, Tasigur. Oh no, yeah, Tasigur, Force of Will, Snapcaster Mage, and Jace. So a lot of points in Nick's hand as well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points at the very least. So both players are kind of playing on their ideal setting where they're both just hitting all of their points, which is pretty important.
Yeah, it's just less good when you are down 2 cards from mulliganing and as a result don't actually have the lands to cast any of those threats.
Yeah,
with even just one more land, the Grixis deck would have been able to delve out a Tasigur, would have been able to play out a Jace, just had access to a lot more toys, but unfortunately that is not currently the case.
Yeah, he needs a couple of cantrips just to kind of fuel Delve. I know that you can only have a certain amount of Delve in your deck. I think like Blue-Black Tempo or Blue-Black Brandon's plays 3 or 4, like going all the way to Tombstalker, but there's definitely a limit to how many you can play because your graveyard will stop filling up.
Yeah, they do get worse and worse in multiples, and particularly in this game where none of that early interaction has really been drawn, the only cards in graveyard are a Fetchland and a Vendilion Clique. Doesn't really fuel Delve particularly well.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, I mean, this Vendilion Clique is staying on the battlefield for quite a long time, which is good. Apologies, it's Rob Luck on Kess Pile and Nick on Rug Life, so got that mixed up at the start, but that's okay, because we're here now, and we see Angrath's Rampage to a relatively new card from for the Kess Pile, but it seems to be working out pretty well. I think the sacrifice as opposed to destroy is can be pretty powerful.
Yeah, I mean, it also just has a lot of flexibility with the card types that it can hit, which is always a really powerful thing, and particularly in a singleton format like Highlander, being able to remove a variety of things is really good.
Sacrifice is also really important when when True No Nemesis is one of the more popular cards in the format. Obviously, getting around the protection from target player, which is definitely a reason to play it over something else.
I think the interaction with Planeswalkers is also really, really valuable.
Yeah.
Like Dreadbore was definitely a card that has seen a decent amount of play on Highlander.
Yeah.
And this is usually a better Dreadbore.
Yeah, we've mentioned in our previous commentary that modal spells are just at such a higher value in Highlander, and Angrath's Rampage is no different for sure. Well, we'll see what the follow up is from Nick. Nick. He does have that Ancestral back in hand. He must have sneakily shuffled it back to the top. So good play style from Nick there. But
he did have the Verdant in play when it was put away. So
yeah, of course.
Always the possibility of seeing it again.
That's true. So we got Burst Lightning as well, but he kind of basically, when Rug Life goes off, it's just one creature sticking around for a very long time, like all good tempo decks, playing a Delver or even a Goblin Guide and just keeping it alive while you just punch in for 2, 3, 4, 5 damage. I think it's really important. But we've only seen a couple of hits from the Vendilion click so far, so Nick's definitely behind, I think, on this aspect.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that tempo decks can fall into in all formats, and especially in Highlander, because it's an archetype where you need not only lands and spells, but you need those spells to be the right combination of interaction, reach, and creatures.
Yeah,
and he hasn't really drawn any of those creatures, so at the moment he's trying to play kind of a long control game rather than any kind of aggressive game, and I think the Grixis deck is definitely much better geared for that in most situations.
Absolutely. Especially with this Search for Cancer now on the battlefield and mana up for Hardcast Force if things go awry. I don't think we'll get to that stage. He's probably just going to hold on to it. But I mean, the rest of his blue cards in his hand are still incredibly powerful. He might savor the opportunity to Hardcast a Force, but when Nick knows about it in his hand, in Rob's hand, it's definitely less likely to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's also just a card that has value in holding on to it until there's some kind of counterspell battle over a key card, and then the fact that it's 0 mana is really important. He's also probably just happy to be end of turning as Cantor.
Yeah.
Once that card flips, which isn't too far off.
Yeah, and once that card does flip, which is pretty soon, he needs to get to Threshold, which he's pretty close to at the moment. But he just ripped a Kess off the top, so if Rob ends up getting that extra land, which it looks like he has in hand now, he's not that far away from having Kess and immediately Angrath's Rampage, so he's probably going to sandbag that until it's relevant, of course, but you definitely don't want to play out a Kess onto an empty board and tap out for it, I think, in this matchup.
No, I don't think there's really any matchups where you'd probably tap out for Kess into an empty board, unless it's your only card in hand. It's just not something that you really want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to get at least a small amount of advantage. Like, with 6 mana, he will be able to Angrath's Rampage, but at the moment, it's not even that big of an issue, obviously. It's not something that he's thinking about. Maybe now with the Brainstorm, he might change his mind. Search for Cantor's flipped, so he's got all the mana that he could possibly want, and he does have that Lightning Bolt, so we're almost at Bolt Snap Bolt at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hefty chunk of damage, but Nick is still on 16 life, so I think that Rob's just going to be pretty content to run out as counter activations would be my guess. Probably just snapping off the Bolt here feels like he has plenty of interaction to spare. It may as well use his mana for something. Yeah,
you can actually activate Search. No, never mind. Sorry, the flip card partially obscured by the glare, but the flip card is on top of the checklist card, so he won't be able to activate and snap Custom Mage and Bolt again. But I think just activating Search with 2 mana open is good enough.
Yeah, I mean, it seems pretty solid, and
looks like he's just going to punch off this Ancestral Recall now. Just given an opportunity, it's going to be harder to do it later. His opponent is pretty much tapped out now, so
he does have a Force though, so it's kind of interesting that he didn't even think it was important enough to try to fight over.
Yeah, I guess he could also be hoping that, because he saw his opponent's hand and he knows that 3 other cards even are blue cards with Snap Custom Mage, Jace, and Dig Through Time. So maybe he was hoping that he wouldn't rip that other key blue spell to pitch with the Force. So there's definitely reasons to do it in response to the Search for Cantor activation.
Yeah, I mean, I can also definitely see Rob thinking that Jace and Snapcaster are too valuable to exile to Force of Will in this instance, and while letting the Ancestral Resolve is unfortunate. It's just something you got to do though.
Yeah, absolutely. And looks like the counter war may start soon because this Liliana will take over the game. I mean, Nick is definitely geared to deal with Liliana. I mean, his hand is he's got Burst Lightning and another red spell, an Incinerary Flow, I believe. So he's definitely got the mana to try and burn Liliana out, but at the cost of multiple cards, he might just try and be more inclined to fight over it on the stack.
Yeah, I mean, he has access. He does have access to enough mana that he could kick a Burst Lightning if he wanted to.
That's true.
But I think he's certainly inclined to at least fight over it a little bit to make Rob tap out a bit of mana. You don't want to be all in on the kicked Burst Lightning, have your opponent counter it, and then Liliana, the Last Hope, just takes over the game.
Yeah. 100% agree. I think, especially when you're in a situation where soft permission is starting to become less relevant, like when you have mana leaks and spell pierces and Izzet Charms and stuff, and your opponent has 7 lands on the battlefield, then it might be a different story. We'll see what this judge call is about. I think they're discussing. It looks like Nick has not gone to hand size by the looks of it. By this conversation, so he's got 6 cards in hand now, 7 with the mana leak. So
I believe the Ancestral was cast in Robert's turn though, so there was no point at which he should have gone down to hand size.
No, it should have been Nick's end step because he did it in response to this as counter activation.
Yeah, sorry, you're correct. Yes.
Yeah, so it looks like he's just discarding the Destructive Revelry, which is a bit of a weird judge call because I guess you've only seen 1 extra card since then because you would have seen the card that you drew for the turn. So I guess technically he can sort of scum his opponent with it, but it looks like we're just going to continue on knowing that Nick, being a high-standing member of the Highlander community, it's probably not part of his prerogative. But we'll see. He's a shifty bloke, so who can know?
Wow, that's not a very nice thing to say.
It's pretty funny, actually, that Robert's just given up on the Liliana after the first counterspell, possibly just rating that Force of Will and the blue cards in his hand just too highly to let go of this Liliana.
Yeah, I mean, there's also just the fact that he still just has enough mana to, as counter, and fighting over Liliana would change that.
Sure.
And, you know, he's pretty likely to hit a card every turn off an as counter activation.
Absolutely.
And that's a pretty huge amount of card advantage, right?
Yeah. Speaking of boggles of the format, it looks like Nick's found his first boggle being Young Pyromancer, so now he can equip auras to it and make tokens. You know, this analogy is going south.
It's definitely a human shaman and not a Burgle. Also, sadly, not a wizard.
That is a shame. But
definitely a very good card.
This is pre-Modern Horizons, if I'm not mistaken. I think it is, knowing the timeline. We've been sitting on these videos for a little bit, trying to get them through the mail, so to speak. But I would probably like to see maybe a Seasoned Pyromancer in this list. Although being 3 mana over 2 mana is definitely a stretch.
Yeah, I think Seasoned Pyromancer also doesn't necessarily synergize with like cantrips and such in the same way. I think Seasoned Pyromancer is definitely a card with potential. It's just also a card that's really hard to evaluate where the right home for it actually is.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a very interesting line because I was thinking the Rishadan Port not very good in the late game, but because usually you use it as a tempo play to kind of stifle your opponent's mana the best you can, but he's doing it to tap down the Azcanta the Sunken Ruin, which kind of taps out Robert in Nick's turn, which is pretty nice. So now he can probably consider going full rain here, and he's eyeing up that Chandra Torch of Defiance, and I feel like this is probably the chance to play it, especially with one red and black mana open from Robert's side.
Yeah, Chandra is definitely a card that is going to really force Robert to have some kind of meaningful response. He does have access to that Kess Angrath's Rampage, I believe still, which is probably a pretty good response. Also does a decent job at holding the fort against Pyromancer, as long as there's not too many tokens.
Yeah.
But yeah, that Richard Import, there's actually, I believe, also on Robert's side, a Wandering Fumarole. So
Of course.
if Robert ever tries to attack with that or use it as a blocker, Port has a lot of value against those creature lands as well.
And this is a pretty crucial turn for this matchup because it looks like we're going for the Force of Will here, and he does have mana to pay for the Daze, which I know is also in Nick's hand. So the Daze is not going to do anything, but it did get rid of that Jace the Mind Sculptor, which is big news. So here comes the Spell Pierce. Can't pay for that, unfortunately. So it looks like it's just going to resolve, and at the hefty cost of 2 cards from Robert's side. So this is definitely not where Rob wants to be.
Yeah, I mean, it does mean Nick is now tapped out, and the way should be clear for a Kassangrath's Rampage line.
Yeah.
And then so long as he can pick off Young Pyromancer at some point in the near future, everything should be okay, but it's definitely placed him on the back foot, and he demands an answer to come out here.
Absolutely. It looks like he has enough mana for 1, 2, 3, 4. So, yeah, mental misstep. So he does have the mana to play Kess, play Angrath's Rampage, and pay for Daze, which is in Nick's hand as well. We're fighting over this counter war, trying to use the Inquisition, and suddenly Robert's back in the game because there's the Daze that protects the Chandra, and Chain Lightning's bad, but
well, it's Burst Lightning.
Oh, Burst Lightning. My apologies.
I think you're almost inclined, to take the Burst Lightning here because your life total is only 9, and even if you do have a Kess out to block, the Elementals can just go wide, get around it. So I think taking Burst Lightning here, which is pretty easily 4 damage with the amount of mana Nick has in play, is definitely the heads up line.
Yeah, I 100% agree. You can play like Daze is so much worse when your opponent knows about it. It's just not. You just play around it forever.
There's definitely instances, particularly early game, where your opponent, knowing you have a Daze, just kind of means that they play the whole game under sort of a virtual Richard Import.
Yeah.
And they kind of ruin their own plan by resolving everything a turn late.
Yeah.
But that's not really true in this instance, where everyone has infinity lands.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. So it looks like we're playing the Daze just because I guess it taps Robert out.
Well, it also triggers Pyromancer,
and it does trigger Pyromancer. So I think that's very, very good point.
Like if Nick just starts going for the big swings, he's got 4 damage here, then 3, then 2, then 1, which I believe is exactly lethal or it might be slightly over lethal if Rob does nothing about it.
Yeah. He drew a Price of Progress off the top, which is pretty interesting. It looks like he's just going to draw the game.
Yeah,
I feel like we've watched a Price of Progress draw the game more than once in our lives, but it's definitely a reasonable option. I think with the Kess and Lightning Bolt and Fumarole might have been close enough that Nick thought that it was acceptable to just tie the game. So
yeah, I mean Nick did have the Richard Import for Fumarole, but
that's true.
I guess he also thinks that with the number of cards Robert has in hand, there is a chance the game could go either way, but the chance is better for Robert, and that's his best opportunity to resolve a Price of Progress.
For sure.
If he waits and lets Robert untap and waits a couple of turns to see where the game goes, then he might not have another shot.
Yeah.
So just opts to do it then. Definitely
an interesting play. We're seeing going to sideboards now on Nicholas's side playing Rug Life. We have Anger of the Gods, Blazing Volley, Blood Moon, Blue Elemental Blast, Flusterstorm, Hydroblast, Magus of the Moon, Pyroblast, Red Elemental Blast, Relic of Progenitus, Seed to Time, Submerge, Sylvan Library, Tomo's Crypt, and Trigon Predator. And on Robert's side, we have Anger of the Gods, Ashok Dreamrender, Blood Moon, Blue Elemental Blast, Duress, Engine Explosives, Flusterstorm, Arrow of Devastation, Hydroblast, Kalidas, Trader of Get, Magus of the Moon, Pyroblast, Red Elemental Blast, Submerge, Young Pyromancer. Pretty interesting to see the full 4. No, not the full 4. Pyroblast, Red Elemental Blast, and Blue Blast on Robert's side, and the same can be said Blue Blast, Red Elemental Blast, and Pyroblast, on Nick's side. So definitely utilizing those free and cheap counter spells on each other's sides. But Phil, what do you think? What do you think is our players' thoughts when sideboarding here?
Yeah, I think Nick, he's got access to a couple of good options here. Obviously, all four of the blasts are decent considerations. I don't know if I'd be bringing in both blue blasts if I was in his seat, just because there's only so many red cards to hit. But they are definitely both cards to consider. Flusterstorm is pretty good. Relic of Progenitus is probably fine. You do use your graveyard a bit, but they use it more at cantrips. It's pretty solid.
Yeah.
Sylvan Library is actually quite good against the Grixis deck. And Seed Time, obviously. This is the kind of matchup where you'd want that effect.
Yeah, exactly. If you're bringing in Seed Time ever, you're going to bring it in this matchup because it's probably the most likely matchup for it. This is pretty interesting sideboard as well from the Kess Pile side because Hour of Devastation seems to be going in and out of relevance over any sort of other board wipe. I think if you're thinking that you're going to come up against a lot of planeswalkers that are relevant, which is true for the most part, then Hour of Devastation is just better in most cases. But we do see that it kind of can get hosed by protection spells because Hour of Devastation does deal the damage as opposed to, say, a Damnation or whatever where the creature just dies and nothing is targeted.
Yeah, for sure. I think that... I think that it's definitely a card that is pretty powerful. There's only so many cards with protection from Hour of Devastation and the damage that it does. So it's usually pretty solid.
Seems pretty reasonable.
I think there's a couple of pretty solid cards in the Grixis sideboard.
Yeah.
So I think that there is potentially some value to bringing in those wraths like Anger or Hour of Devastation is probably a bit too expensive. But Anger of the Gods, while it's not great against some of the threats, like a Goblin Guard or something, it's a pretty good answer to Young Pyromancer.
Yeah.
I also would be pretty okay with bringing in a Kalitas Trader of Get here.
Yeah,
Not just
absolutely.
because the card is a warrior, but also because it's a pretty good blocker against a lot of things, has lifelink, does quite a few things.
Yeah, and going to our opening hands now, we do see a pretty fair chunk of sideboard cards on each of our opponent's side. But while we were talking about sideboards, we did miss this pretty crucial play of Nick having his only off-colored land that he uses for Death Red Shaman activations in the Underground Sea, being his only land, but backed up with an Ancestral Recall that got Thought Seized on turn 1, which kind of sucks.
Yeah,
honestly.
it's not really where you want to be in life.
Yeah. But
I don't know. I would give Nick a hard time for it, but I've definitely kept that exact hand several times when playing Ancestral Recall decks.
Yeah.
So
I think there's especially in a singleton format, you just kind of gotta hope to dodge the turn 1 discard because you just don't have as many discard spells, obviously, or many slots devoted to discard spells if you're versing, say, Legacy Grixis or something like that, where you have 8, or probably not 8, but maybe 6. So I would probably keep a hand like that in the future again. But now at least his mana problems are kind of shored up. He does have counterspell mana up now with a double blue with off the Arid Mesa, and he's got his red mana as well for his Direfleet Daredevil and Chain Lightning. So it seems like his mana problems are fading away quite fast, which is good news for Nick, that's for sure.
yeah, I mean, only having the Arid Mesa would have let him find double blue, or would have let him find both green and red. But it wouldn't have been able to do both. But having the breeding pool as well means he should be pretty sorted on the mana issues now.
Yeah, he's got that regrowth in hand. Wondering if when he'll punch that off, because he's probably going to want to save it for when he thinks that it will resolve, because getting back that Ancestral Recall will again undo all the sad times that he had mulling to 5, I believe it was. Regrowth being a sorcery is definitely relevant here as well. You kind of don't want to tap out for it too much,
Yeah, I feel like tapping out is obviously unfortunate, but I think Regrowth is also another one of these cards that's just really undervalued in the Highlander format.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
when you only get to have each effect once, being able to rebuy an effect is significantly more valuable than it would be in any other format.
Yeah.
And then that's kind of doubled up on in Highlander, because we have all these absurdly powerful cards like Ancestral Recall, Time Walk. Having a regrowth in your deck and being able to do one of those things a second time is really powerful.
Absolutely. We're seeing a dig through time at the end of Nick's turn on Robert's side. Oh, this is a main phase. Interesting. Okay, so we went for the main phase dig through time, knowing that it will resolve, which is met with Nick knowing that now this regrowth line will resolve, which is pretty fantastic. So each player definitely going back up to the amount of cards that they want to have for this matchup, but letting each other sort of take that route. We see Goblin Guide off this Ancestral Recall, as well as 2 Blasts and a Chain Lightning, if I'm not mistaken. So kind of an interesting hand, but we'll see if this Hydroblast can get some work done. Counterspell off the Goblin Guide, which will be good information for the future. Pretty hard to play around Counterspell, I guess, because there's no playing around it unless you know that your opponent can't tap it, or I guess you'll just have to run out progressively worse spells or have your own Counterspell backup. So
yeah, it's just a question of timing your spells and what order you use. So timing your spells both in terms of when you cast them and what order you cast them.
Absolutely. Speaking of leaving Counterspell mana up, we're playing this Jace. Wonder if we're ticking up. No, it's ticking up is almost always the worst play, but when you know that your opponent's going to be chunking in for 2 at least, and they're known for having multiple burn spells, trying to keep the Jace alive at 5 is slightly easier than keeping it alive at 3, but might just be playing this 4 mana Brainstorm.
Sure. I mean, I think that as some Highlander players have said, the elevator only goes one way, and that is up. And so you can only take the Jace up. But I think in this instance, you suspect that if you do that, Jace will die to a Goblin Guide attack plus a bolt.
Yeah.
Whereas this way, if Jace gets bolted, you're still up cards from the Brainstorm, and you're only down a little bit of life because you're still getting hit by Goblin Guide.
Yeah.
So I think that while in general I do like ticking up Jace, I think that it's not as fantastic as it might be in other instances.
It seems pretty mana efficient from Nick's side, showing again how important it is to have modal spells, but using the Spire Ice just to take off that one little piece of damage, because if it was a bolt, you could take it out with 1 card, granted, but if it was, say, a Burst Lightning where it only had 2, then you'd kind of have to attack with Goblin Guide and Burst Lightning, so like you're devoting 2 cards essentially to getting rid of their one Jace, when those attacks with that Goblin Guide is definitely going to be pretty worth it.
Yeah, I believe he does have access to both Lightning Bolt and Chain Lightning, and so kind of any...
one, 2, or 3, make a choice.
Yeah, but... So it doesn't matter in terms of damage which choice he made, but he has made the more mana efficient play.
For sure.
Which could turn out to be relevant given the players don't both have super high numbers of lands right now, and there is still a port in play. I think that trying to be mana efficient definitely has a lot of value here.
Just counting up the mana sources, it is a little bit awkward, because if you knew that you would definitely win a fight with your opponent by having 2 blasts in hand, you probably want to keep the mana up for it, but with Nick being only on the 1 volcanic island, it definitely makes it a whole lot more awkward to try and chain together those red spells. Yeah,
I'm seeing a nice new War of the Spark card here.
Yeah, Ashiok Dream Render. A lot of fun.
Yeah, it certainly sparked a lot of discussion in Highlander as to just how much play the card should see. Most people seem to be pretty on board for it as a good card. It obviously just incidentally hates on a pretty huge number of things, because you've got the exile as well as the inability for your opponents to search libraries.
Yeah.
It's very powerful text.
That search library clause is so important, and your opponent's always going to get punked by the static ability of one planeswalker or another. So just even against this deck where another new War of the Spark card, Narset Putter of Veils, even when your opponent's say on Rug, where they're probably playing more fetch lands than your regular opponent. Because they want to sort of make sure that their mana is as good as possible, also have as little land cards in your deck as possible, so it kind of turns off slightly more cards, maybe 1 or 2 cards more than you would anticipate. But this Narset Putter of Veils is also a pretty heavily hated card as you go further back in Eternal formats.
Yeah, definitely seen some very upset vintage players about the existence of this card. The kind of the level text of only being able to draw 1 card per turn on a planeswalker, which can be pretty difficult for some decks to interact with, is rather rude, really.
Oh yeah. Thankfully, Nick's been kind of sandbagging these burn spells and pyroblasts for these planeswalkers, which is definitely relevant considering how intensely blown out he would have been by probably both of them. I mean, the Ashiok just staying on the battlefield also exiles a bunch of cards from your library, which is always relevant.
Yeah, I mean, particularly when you're playing a deck that has Snapcasters and Regrowths in it, no longer having access to those cards at all is pretty meaningful.
Yeah, absolutely. And even here we're seeing a slight blowout with this Jace Vern's Prodigy kind of never flipping, and the Delve spell only just making it with this Hooting Mandrills, because now we see Hooting Mandrills taking out the rest of the graveyard. Jace is basically never going to flip and going to live his life forever, well, until this Liliana takes a chokehold of the game, but just always be a -2/1 as Liliana continues to tick up. Probably not going to do it at this point anymore now that we have 2 actual relevant creatures on the battlefield.
Yeah, so I think it is sort of interesting that Nick didn't elect to do a main phase Jace Vryn's Prodigy in his turn.
Yeah.
Like, it's unlikely it would necessarily change his game plan, but it is sort of...
It's nice to have the option.
It's sort of one of those things where generally the first thing you should do in your turn is use your loots, and then do the other stuff after you know what cards you have access to.
Yeah, exactly.
He's probably not super happy about running out the Delver of Secrets there, but I guess he's just opting to not have the Hooting Mandrills lose power so that he can threaten a bit of a tighter clock on this Liliana.
Yeah, absolutely. So continuing to stay as a 4/4 allows this Liliana to kind of get chunked for quite a large bit of damage, but giving up. I definitely agree. Giving up on the Delver of Secrets does feel pretty bad, but while this Liliana's on the battlefield, it's just not going to feel very good either way.
Yeah, for sure. I think that this is also one of those situations I was talking about in the previous game where Rishon Import is pretty good against those creature lands, because without that, Robert could elect to jump block or to try to trade with Fumarole, but here it's just going to get tapped down by the Rishon Import before it can ever block.
Yeah, and also he's used his mana to... That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, he has elected to use it to activate Creeping Top in response, but he's going to get pretty savagely wrecked by a Lightning Bolt here. Even if he wasn't getting Lightning Bolted there, he would be in the instance of he just jumping with Creeping Top it and kind of back in the same boat in the next turn.
Yeah,
so it's all really coming up nicely for Nick.
Yeah, that was a really, really good play by Nick, and really utilizing the last few cards that he had in hand. But this is the Rug seems to be one of the harder decks to pilot. You can't just punch off lightning bolts. You have to play a worse control game against your control opponent while also still executing your own game plan, playing out these giant creatures. But he seems to be piloting it quite well, so we'll see how it works out for him.
Yeah, I think it's just true of tempo decks in any format, because there's kind of the old piece of like sideboarding advice about thinking about who's the aggro in the matchup.
Yeah.
But when there's a tempo deck in the matchup, who's the aggro changes every turn, sometimes during the turn, and it can be really skill testing playing a tempo deck or playing against a tempo deck, being able to keep up with those constant pivots of who's on the back foot and who's on the front foot in the game.
Yeah, well, yeah, we talk about with control decks how important it is to know when you're supposed to turn the corner, and as you said, with tempo decks, it kind of changes more often than you'd like it to, you know. So, Kess being a pretty good top deck, I believe it was a top deck. Maybe Nick was, Robert was just waiting for the correct time to do it. But again, with that Angrath's Rampage getting so much value, getting rid of the Jace, I think Nick just elected to not mill one, which I guess was an option for him. But yeah, getting rid of the Jace seems to be pretty okay at this point. It's going to be pretty hard to flip. And these Hooting Mandrills and Tarmogoyf are such huge threats that you're probably okay with keeping them around.
Yeah, I mean, I probably would have elected to just mill one, or to be more aggressive with my looting, but he's electing just to keep those cards in his deck, have access to them for the, future turns of the game, so...
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing this, I think the Hooting Mandrills is going after the Liliana, and we're just going to give up on it. Theoretically, we could chump block with the Kess, but I think at this point you want to be using Kess as many turns as you possibly can before it dies.
It's not a chump block, because the Hooting Mandrills was only a 2/3 because of the Liliana activation. So if Nick has nothing, you just get to eat Hooting Mandrills and keep Liliana.
Yeah. I guess
so it's
just
definitely
didn't want to take the chance.
Yeah, I mean, Nick does only have one card in hand, so I think that it's certainly very possible that blocking there is right. But I guess you're also in a situation where Liliana the Last Hope doesn't really answer the board anymore.
Yeah.
But Kess might.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It's not worth trying to have your cake and eat it too. You should just have Kess.
Okay.
Because that card has a much better chance at closing out this game than a Liliana would.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's again a really good showing of how talented these Magic players are at their craft, because thinking about, do I take the chance on whether or not my opponent has a Lightning Bolt in hand or a Chain Lightning or whatever at one card, instead of doing that maths, which is probably something that I would do, where you just like, do I take the risk or not? Instead, Robert's thinking about what card is more important to me right now. Like, Kess, as you said, is huge right now. Kess is doing so much more work than Liliana, I think, could do at this point, even though Liliana could possibly tick down at some point and get Kess back. It's probably not worth even making the risk,
Yeah, I think if the most relevant thing your Liliana the Last Hope is going to do for the foreseeable future is tick down and get Kess back, you should probably just take the line where you keep Kess.
Just keep Kess on the battlefield. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely true. And doing this dig through time, hopefully swinging the game in Robert's direction, playing his own Delve threat from the from Fate Reforged, I believe. Go Mag Strong, is that right?
I think that's correct.
Cool. So it's truly a battle of the Delve threats from the plane of Tarkir, but Kess not playing by anyone's rules, flying over the top for a big chunk of 3 damage. So
yeah, I mean, if you don't have any intention of chump blocking with Kess, then there is no reason to attack.
Yeah, absolutely.
Although I feel as though you might want to leave it as an option, just because if the Gamma Angler gets removed or gets tapped down by a Fire Ice or something bad happens to Gamma Angler, you're facing down at least 6 damage, and possibly more, depending on what Nick does with his turn to fuel the Tarmogoyf, or what burn he might have access to.
Yeah, absolutely. This is actually something that I didn't realize before, was that when he delved away his cards with Dig Through Time, he actually shrunk the Goyf pretty considerably.
I think he only shrunk it by 2 from Land and Sorcery.
And Planeswalker.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
That is actually pretty true.
Yeah.
I mean, there is kind of a big difference between a 4/5 and a 2/3, even if there wasn't that Planeswalker around.
Yeah, absolutely. Well put. And we're seeing the Chandra not having the the mana to protect it with this Is It Charm that he has in his hand, but I think just getting that Kess off the battlefield and
Oh, that is filthy, filthy turn.
oh god, K Command being such a powerhouse in basically every deck that it comes into. Like, we're just gonna recast this Kess, like no real big deal. And also we have K Command in the battlefield, in the graveyard for next turn for Kess, so that was pretty fantastic. We're really seeing the power of these Khan's block Khan's block cards here.
Yeah, this is actually a Khan's block limited video now.
And we'd all be pretty happy for it, but I think we have Vendilion Click off the top, maybe from Nick's side. Yeah, by the looks of it, we're seeing an Is It Charm and an Island from the Gush that happened before, and the Vendilion Click as previously mentioned. So no shortage of threats from Nick's side, but unfortunately they're not great threats. Unfortunately, Hooting Mandrill's going to get in. It looks like we're probably just going to Is It Charm the Gomag Angler to lay a bit of damage on it before we trade with the Hooting Mandrills. So
it also does deal 1 damage to Robert because Hooting Mandrills does have trample.
Okay.
So
Okay.
That's,
good point.
Some value right there.
We'll see if the players realize that. I don't believe the life total has changed since, but now that we've untapped, oh no, that's not the case, right? Oh yeah, it is. Yeah, you're right. My apologies. Yeah. So Gomag Angler having 3 damage marked on it, pretty nice play. But seeing the K Command probably coming back for its second showing at maybe not this turn. Oh, we're just getting the value off the Young Pyromancer as well. That's
Robert drew this for turn, which is a pretty insane draw. He's just kind of drawn gas for 2 or 3 turns straight.
Must be nice, honestly.
Yeah, honestly. I mean, when Kess recasts your dig through time, it probably really helps a lot with making sure you have relevant cards to play for the rest of the game.
Oh yeah, no kidding. And we're realizing the life total change now, which is good. So making your opponent discard a card in these sort of grindy blue-based, esque mirrors, pretty huge game for sure. Even if it's just an island, it's 1 less card that you can loot away with one of your looting spells. It's 1 less land drop that you can make. And we're kind of just empty-handed now, just Vendilion clicking our opponent. And Gomaggio back from the dead. And truly the zombiest fish there is, and 2 lands. So it's going to take the other threat, and probably just going to crunch in the air here. Ooh, going full force. All right.
Yeah, I mean, there's no real reason to not attack with Tarmogoyf here. Like, it kind of accomplishes the same thing attacking as it would by blocking, because it's probably just going to
eat an
elemental.
Yeah, good point.
There's no real value not attacking with it, I guess, and maybe Robert manages to, in real life, F6 through his blocks, and you just get that cheeky bit of damage through.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. He is leaving himself open to Wandering Fumarole getting in as well, which I think is not completely irrelevant. 1, 2...
He still has the port.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. So we're just going to Lightning Bolt for the face now, and we have 3 damage in the air with Kess, and yeah, it looks like it's going to be a flashback here, so... Yeah, could be lights out pretty soon for our hero here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if he hadn't attacked with Tarmogoyf, he could have lived on 1.
There you go. Shouldn't have F6 for the return by accident.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that pretty handily given to Robert Lark from that one. Although I probably said that too hastily. I think there was definitely some back and forth, and we didn't quite know whose game it was going to be for most of that. Actually. But I think by the looks of it, we went to time. So Nick deciding to do the honourable scoop the last one and then just not bother going to...
he would lose anyway. It's a 1-0...
Of course.
1-1-0 or 1-0-1.
You could ask your opponent to concede.
You could, but if that is... they've filled out the match result correctly as being 1 win for Robert and a draw, which makes Robert the winner.
Yeah. I guess that truly is the biggest sub game in Magic is riding on the match strip and correctly and hoping your opponent doesn't notice. Be like, I'll take this up. Don't worry about it.
Sure.
All right, that was round 2 for our Eternal Masters Highlander event. Lots more to come. I believe we're going through the whole gambit. So 5 rounds and a cut to top 8. So please stay tuned for more Highlander goodness coming to your very eyes and ears. Please tune in, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.